All right, so hopefully you got all of that from the first part. Let's look at part two now. Let's go back and we were talking about the new loans. Now, the banks now are being stuffed with money because they're sitting here holding all of these mortgages, and in's coming the Fed and buying billions. And I think we need to get our head around what a billion means. $40 billion a month means over $1,000 million a day. 1,000 million makes 1 billion. So it's more than $1,000 million a day that the Fed is buying from the banking systems, and exclusively with this QE Infinity, is focused on mortgage-backed securities. That's the bond against your house, your mortgage payment. So when the Fed does that, you're still paying Bank of America or Wells Fargo on your check, but who's really getting the money? Federal Reserve. What about a profit going back to the government? We'll talk about that at the end, and you'll start to see how all this ties together. So that's going on. So the banks are literally having their inventory of mortgages liquidated. And the way a bank makes money is by making loans, because they create it with, again, a journal entry. This is hard to accept, but again, when you go to the bank, you borrow $200,000 for your house, they hold $20,000 in reserve and create $200,000 in new money with that journal entry. And then that creates an accounts receivable that could be worth as much as $500,000-$600,000 over the 30-year mortgage. And that's on their accounts receivable side. Well, that's being taken away by the Fed and replaced with money. So what are they going to do with it? Well, they're going to buy these three things. They're going to take, Bank of America might get a $5 billion for their share of the $40 billion. It's one of the biggest lenders in America. So they'll take a big chunk of it and they'll stick it in gold. They'll put a bunch of it in bonds and treasuries because they have to hold it reserved in what's called a premium holding, right? So these three qualify for that. And then they'll take some of it and they have to replace this loan liquidation, and they loan out new money. Now, here's what can happen now. They know Uncle Ben's coming back next month and next month and next month to infinity and beyond, like Buzz Lightyear. He's coming back to buy more. They can loosen up their lending now. And that every month that there's a chance to dump their loans, they can cherry pick the ones they keep, and they can sell the crappiest ones. Maybe we really should have done this. These certain loans fall under this category where they're a little bit more risky. They can dump those. So if you could loan money, but always recycle it by dumping off the mistakes, wouldn't you be more open with your lending? That's what the hope is. The banks will open up, and they'll have to, because he's going to keep doing it until they're forced, their hand is forced. They get to then cherry pick the good mortgages and send the ones that are a little bit sketchy over to the Fed, who's also buying them with a journal entry. Okay? So that is how this starts to heat up. Now, all of this money you've been hearing about, they're printing money, but the inflation really hasn't taken off. We've seen some upticks in gold and silver, we've seen upticks in some hard commodities, but really we haven't seen the kind of inflation we've been expecting. That's about what's called the velocity of money. It's not just about how much money there is, it's about how much money is moving around and multiplying in the economy. The banks have been hoarding the money in treasuries, bonds, and cash and gold, because they're scared crapless of the day of reckoning. This starts the money moving. And when the money starts moving, it's moving all here. Again, we got to look at where the money's, follow the money is the old saying. Okay, so when the Fed picks up these existing current mortgages, the ones that are considered relatively safe, what they're buying now are actually really good mortgages, even though the ones the banks want to get rid of, because the current mortgages that are out there now, the homeowner has demonstrated an ability to pay even through a tough time. Additionally, a lot of them are relatively newer mortgages, so instead of the toxic assets, which were partly because of bad loans, but partly because people bought at the top of a market that fell. So even if your homeowner can pay the mortgage, if he's got a mortgage for $200,000 and his house is worth $100,000 and you're holding that mortgage, you got a real risk. But now with people buying at a low end of the market, theoretically anyway, they're buying a much safer mortgage with their journal entry. Toxic assets, they'll still pick up. They don't have a problem with it. I'll explain to you why, and you'll see how this whole gambit turns into checkmate in the end. U.S. bonds, they'll buy those because they have to. Anytime that there's not enough bonds sold to keep the government running, Uncle Ben just buys some. He buys them through Goldman Sachs so that his buddies over there make money every time he does his little journal entry thing. And then lastly, they're buying gold. And they'll take all of the cash they can raise and they'll go to gold. They're buying collectively, the global central banks, the European Central Bank, U.S. Central Bank, all the central banks collectively are buying up 10% of the world's gold reserves a year right now. And they've been doing that for over a year. So they're really stockpiling the gold. Okay? So what happens when this whole thing explodes? What happens when we finally realize we can't pay the debt back? What position now are the banks put in, and what are the feds put in, and are the people put in? This is where you start to unravel it and understand. So here you go. The banks will be holding gold. Gold star, right? You can't do any better than that. No matter what happens, the gold will have value. They'll be holding bonds and treasuries. But as this process continues, they'll reduce their holdings and migrate to gold slowly so that people don't get wind of it too fast. Because this is a signal that they're exiting these vehicles. As the housing market starts to heat up, all the markets start to heat up, all the commodity markets start to heat up, and people start to have cash flowing again into these vehicles so the banks can take their pressure off the upward pressure because institutional money, etc., starts to flood in. So they slide over into more and more gold, and what they end up holding in the end really won't hurt them that much anyway. Then new loans. They have now the cherry-picked loans. Because the people that tell you when this thing falls apart, it's going to be Armageddon, everybody's going to be killing each other, blood in the streets, probably some riots in some cities and some places like that, but they will quickly replace the old paradigm with a new one. There will be a new monetary system plugged in, just the way there was in 1913, 1933, 1965, 1971, okay? There will be an economy. And these loans will be the people that are most likely to be able to adapt to the new economy, even if they live really, really poor and scrape to get by, but they'll get paid on higher percentage than any of the other loans, because all the other loans have been dumped over here to Ben. All right? And the banks, we won't worry about what they're selling, because this is the end game. This is about what you're holding. This is hot potato. What are you holding in the end? So what's the Fed going to be holding? The Fed will be holding all the crappy mortgages. Okay? The Fed will be holding all the toxic assets. So let's talk about those two first and why it doesn't hurt the Fed. Remember, the Fed buys them with a journal entry. The only obligation they have to pay to the United States Treasury, and this is why people say the Federal Reserve's not private. This is why people say it's all a conspiracy theory. Any profit the Federal Reserve makes has to go to the U.S. Treasury. But let's say that the Fed bought in one little chunk $5 billion in toxic assets in one little chunk that they're analyzing for that quarter's profit. And that toxic asset portfolio is now only worth $3 billion. How much profit have they made? They're actually in the hole for $2 billion. But they have $3 billion in assets that have $3 billion because these toxic assets do have value. There's a house out there, or there's a commercial business property, or there's a farm. There's something on the other side of that asset. There's something there. The Fed now effectively owns it and can sell it into the new economy for whatever its market value is and keep it all because there's no profit. Right? See how simple this is? They're holding these current mortgages. Let's say that these current mortgages actually tend out to be more profitable. But let's say that this month's current mortgages, that when they decide to go ahead and market and sell these back out to the market, they had $50 billion that they sold in mortgages back out into whatever kind of new market has been created. And they sell it for $50 billion, and the underlying purchase price was $49 billion. $1 billion goes to the Treasury, the Fed keeps $49 billion. You got it? So they're only going to give the profit, and that means they can lose their ass and still be okay. U.S. bonds, it won't matter because this whole vehicle will be flipped over, and all of the cash that's being siphoned out along the way is going to gold. So what are they doing? What's the game? The game is we're going to a commodity-backed currency. And it may not just be a pure gold currency. It probably won't be. It'll probably have a hybrid of some kind of a gold backing with a fiat, side kicker. It'll probably bring silver in. They'll probably say things like a nation will be able to build its new global-based currency on its total net worth asset value. That will be what the new cap on the currency is to prevent runaway inflation that this will create in the end game. And then when they do that, the most valuable commodity out of them, or at least the most stable, reliable commodity, even in that commodity basket of currency, is going to be gold. So what are these guys trying to do? They're trying to make sure when the potato gets really hot, you're holding it, and they're holding gold. And they'll probably, again, they'll hold silver. They'll hold any kind of commodity that'll hold its value in this new paradigm. And it's not going to be road warrior. It's not. And people in the survival and preparedness industry, they like to tell you that because it makes you buy pallets of food. I'm telling you to buy pallets of food because food's going to be really expensive and this is going to suck. And there will be some breakdown in society. There will be rioting, but in the end, most of it will be held together. You're looking at a partial breakdown as people are force-fed this new monetary paradigm. So what do you do to protect yourself? Number one, you realize that Ben's gambit, this chess game, is designed to last 2 years or more, maybe 3, maybe 4. This guy just kicked the can further than I ever believed he could do it. And it's designed to give them time to build their war chests so that when it's over, the Fed's holding a huge block of real property that's underwater, but they can afford for it to be, and the banks are holding leverage against real property that's relatively stable, solid investments that has good cash flow. And the Fed can then market off their real property and exchange that for whatever the new paradigm requires. It's the new land barons. It's a land grab with a gold backing. This is what they're doing. So what you need to be doing is emulating what they're doing on a small scale. You need to make sure that precious metals are part of your holdings, that commodities, especially food that you eat every day, are part of your holdings. This is a good time to get yourself a piece of land because people say it's going to be really cheap when this happens. We don't know that. Or how much money will you have? Or what will it be worth? Or I've got gold, so it'll all work out for me. We don't know how this is going to work out. We do know what we want to be holding. Real hard assets, property, and land that produces for us. All the big money right now is running to gold, timberland, and farmland. Do that on a small scale and understand, what does the farmland produce? Food. So if you can't own farmland or even an acre that you are taking care of to feed yourself off of, own the food that would be produced by an acre for a year or two. That's the only way you're going to get through this. This is not the end of the world as we know it. This is a giant economic shift, the largest economic shift that's ever happened in the history of mankind. And people are going to get really, really hurt. And I can't guarantee you won't get hurt if you follow my advice. But what I'll tell you is it will mitigate the damage. You'll be more likely to make it through. And hey, if they pull this off, and it really works, and we don't have the partial collapse that seems to be at the end of this bubble, you'll still be better off. With that, this has been Jack Spirko with another Survival Podcast video.